Welcome to a Photofocus and X-Rite photo and video webinar about color with our special guest, Brenda Hipsher, the X-Rite Product Brand Manager. I'm Kevin Ames. I'm the Director of Content for Photofocus, and I want to welcome Brenda to our webinar. Hi, Brenda. How are you?
Hey, thanks, Kevin. It's great to be here.
Oh, it's good to see you. You're always so much fun to chat with, and I can hardly wait to share your expertise in color with all of our viewers and readers.
It's a pleasure.
I have been a fan, as you know, of X-Rite products for, well, I don't know if you recognize this, but
Oh, wow. Look at that.
yeah, this is the original ColorChecker chart. I got it in '83, but this is the 1977 version, which is the very first one. And
Macbeth color checker. That's what we called it.
it's what?
Macbeth color checker.
Yeah, you
That's
can see
what
it
we
right
called
there. Let me move my
Yeah.
fingers. Yeah, that's the original. And this one's had a lot of use, as you can probably tell. This one's been retired.
If yours looks like that, don't use it anymore.
That's really good advice, Brenda. Brenda, what is the first step to color management?
Well, the first step, it's ironic that the first step we're going to talk about doesn't involve a color checker, because the very first step in a color managed workflow is actually the middle step, and that is monitor calibration. You know, we have our camera, we have our monitor, and then we have whatever output, whether that's online, whether it's printed in a book, or whether it's printed on an inkjet printer. But the middle part of that is the monitor, where we're actually doing the editing. And my best advice is that that is where you start in that three-step process. So the most important thing that we can do is choose which monitor calibration device that we want to use. And let's look at the X-Rite website. First of all, let's talk about the fact that we use xritephoto.com. When you go to xrite.com, you get all the industrial solutions and all the different sensors and color management systems that are made for all different kinds of industries. So we've actually built a website called xritephoto.com that allows you to actually, we curated all of the photo and video products. So as you can see here, if you go to the products drop-down menu, the first thing you see is display solutions. When we go there, we see the three colorimeter solutions that are available. The new i1 Studio display, very, very good device, very nice price, an excellent place to start for anyone. But what I want to point out to you is the i1 Display Pro runs on a different software package, and it gives you more options. It also is a device that will be compatible with BenQ software, AZO software, ViewSonic software.
So this is the one, Brenda, if I could interrupt for just a second.
Sure.
This is the one that you'd use if you've got a monitor made by somebody else that allows it to be color calibrated. Because the other one, it might be too bright, right?
You know, every monitor is probably going to be too bright, with the exception of these very high-end monitors. These very high-end monitors come pre-calibrated usually from the factory, so people a lot of times think that they don't have to ever calibrate them again. So the truth is that all monitors drift over time. So if you have an AZO, a ViewSonic, a BenQ, anything that has its own software, and you need a device to use with it, the i1 Display Pro is probably the one to go with rather than the Display Studio. If you're just starting out and you've got a nice Apple monitor, you've got a nice 4K Samsung monitor, something like that, the Display Studio is a fine device. And if you happen to be a person who's doing a lot of video editing, you may want to look at our new i1 Display Pro Plus. This device is designed to give you a little better color detail in dark areas on HDR monitors. And it will also, for video editing, it'll give you access to a particular tone curve that we don't use on the photo side. So 3 devices, take your choice, but the point is please, I beg you, calibrate and profile your monitor. So the issue with monitors, you can buy some very nice monitors that are not necessarily pre-calibrated at the factory. I use one myself in my own studio here. The issue is that these monitors are not made for photo editing. And so they're made for looking at content on the web or viewing videos. That means they're very bright, they're very contrasty, and they're just a little bit blue because that's what makes humans excited when they look at screens of any kind. So if we edit on a monitor that is too bright, too contrasty, and a little bit blue, we're going to get prints that are a little bit dark, a little bit flat, and a little bit warm. And a lot of people listening to us are going to say, oh, yeah, I've had that happen.
Well, maybe we ought to go back and understand how we perceive color.
Yes.
Do you have something white?
Well, I have something that most people consider white, and that's an apple mouse.
Well, how does the brain work when it sees white, Brenda?
The brain is and the eyes, first of all, we don't really understand how vision works, but we know that our human vision is adaptable. We know that if we see something under a certain color of light, our eyes will filter it and correct the color until what our brain thinks is white makes it white.
So
right?
Here's the problem. I've got a picture of 3 of those mice or mouses, or however you want to say it, one under daylight, one under a light bulb, and one under open shade. The light bulb is really yellow. The daylight is normal looking. It looks white. And the open shade is really blue.
Right. It's the same principle that we have all the time when we look at warm LED versus cool LED or tungsten light versus outdoor lights. Our eyes adapt. Have you ever put on any of those yellow sunglasses and everything looks really yellow for a few minutes and then all of a sudden it starts to look fine?
Yeah, absolutely.
And then you take the glasses off and everything's blue? That's an example of how eyes adapt. That's what they're supposed to do. But it also makes them crummy instruments for setting up a monitor because they do change.
So what you're telling me is that our eyes are the world's worst color calibrator.
They are the world's worst color calibrator. They're the world's best photo editor because they interpret what feels good to us. But they're terrible at calibration.
Okay, Brenda, well, what's the next step now that we've got our monitor calibrated?
The next step then is let's get the most perfect color we can get, the most accurate color we can get from our cameras. We often get in these situations where we're either using 2 different cameras ourselves or we're shooting with someone and we need to match 2 cameras. And the easiest thing in the world nowadays is to match 2 sensors that are giving off color that are very different. So let's say I'm only shooting 1 camera. So what's the point of worrying about that? The reason is because a camera profile is going to get attached to the processing of the raw file, whether you attach it or not.
And if we don't attach it, Adobe's going to, or whoever we're using is going to attach one for us.
That's right. And it's going to be a generic profile that is not matched to our camera sensor. Go ahead.
So are you saying that our camera sensors are not uniform from the same model, that from camera to camera to camera they vary?
Absolutely they do. And anyone who's had 2 cameras of the same model will know that very well. Anybody in the industry knows that very well. They don't vary as much as they used to, but any variance at all is going to give us problems when we start trying to edit from 2 cameras.
So that would be a real problem if, say, we have a wedding and we've got a second shooter. They're both using the same camera, but they're not profiled. The wedding dress and the bride might look different.
Oh, yeah. And as you know, a lot of us, when we're using second shooters, we're often not even using the same brand of camera, much less the same model.
If we have a profile for each camera, the results that we'll get from those cameras will match.
Yes. I just came back from Africa with about 5,000 raw files shot on 2 very different cameras. And so I had this experience myself. I made profiles for those 2 cameras, master profiles that I attached. I did my white balances on where each lighting change happened. And I was able to put those files into the same folder and just edit them as if they came from the same camera.
Okay, well, I'll bet you that some of our viewers right now are really confused about what you mean by profiles and what you're talking about and how we make those. And I think the first thing to talk about is what standard is used to decide what the color is going to be. And that goes back to that color checker chart I showed earlier in the webinar. There you go. That's the 24 patch color checker Passport Photo 2.
This is the color checker. This is actually the 24 patch. We call it the color checker classic, that is built into the original Passport and the color checker Passport Photo 2.
And that's what we use. That target has been the industry standard. I know that I used it when I was shooting film in order to get the filter pack that was necessary to make the film neutral. So it goes all the way back, like I said, and the original one came out in 1976, I think. So,
well, we have it as an official 1978. So the T-shirts that I make for the color checker says established 1978. You probably got one that's even was in 1977.
Yeah,
so
that's what the copyright says on this one.
Yeah. Yeah, so you have one of the first ones that was really ever sold in the United States. And it quickly became a standard because we did what was called clip tests. We shot the color checker. We sent it to the lab. I was one of those people working in the labs. We clipped off the front end of that film. We ran it through the processor, and then we looked at it. And we decided whether we needed to increase or decrease the agitation to make it more warm or more cool, and whether we needed to lengthen or shorten the amount of time it was in the developer to make it lighter or darker.
Right.
That's how we did color balancing then.
I totally remember that, and I paid a really good price to get those kinds of services from my lab. Then I discovered that they could read the color checker, the film, with a spectrophotometer and give me the actual filter packs to put in front of the lens. And when I was doing architecture and interior, and this is on 4x5 in very deliberate work, it paid off because we buy our film in huge emulsion batches of the same number. So let's go on and get back into the digital age. And we want to talk about how to make these illuminants. And the illuminants are made by actually photographing the color checker chart. Is that right?
That's right. When you're actually working, the only thing you need to do is in a raw workflow, take a picture of the color checker and just make sure that your camera is set on any white balance except auto. Any.
Right.
Because remember, with a raw file, everything we do in post is instructions to the software for how to process the file.
Right.
Right? We're looking at a file that's unprocessed. Right. So as long as the white balances are stable throughout however long you have on a particular lighting setup, then you can correct them to perfection.
Okay, we're going to actually demonstrate that before we close out the webinar, but I'd like to move on to actually making one of these profiles. And rather than making just a single profile for a given situation, you mentioned something called a master profile, and I'm curious as to what that is.
So what I call a master profile is a profile that's made from two different illuminants, two different colors of light, and preferably the widest distance of light that we can get. So a very warm light and a very cool light. So a tungsten light and something shot in shade would be a very wide variance of Kelvin temperature, right?
Right.
So maybe 3,200 to 6,500, 7,000 degrees Kelvin.
Okay, well, on my screen, I've got one that was shot, the one on the left was shot under 10,000 degrees, and the one on the right was shot under 2,800 degrees. And we'll show you the setup in just a minute. But you can see the difference in color. The one on the left is blue, the one on the right is yellow.
Right. So if we make one profile from these two illuminants, that's how we get the name dual illuminant profile. then we have a profile that can be used for as a master profile for that whole range of color, temperature, or light.
Okay, now this extra software to do this costs a lot of money, right?
Oh yeah, it's absolutely free, downloadable when you buy your ColorChecker.
Right. And that's the beautiful thing about it. And it's super easy to use. What you do, actually, you can walk us through this. I have let me get the software on the screen here. And this is the entire interface right here. And but before we do that, we've got to convert those files. It only works with DNGs, right?
Right, and a lot of people get confused. They think that they have to convert all of their files to a DNG. The only files that have to be converted to a DNG are the 1 or 2 files you're going to use to create the profile.
Okay.
So you've got 2 illuminants here. The first thing you're going to do is process those files to DNGs.
All right, let's show people how to do that. I'm going to pop over to Bridge, and I have the 2 files selected right here. And I'm going to open them up in Camera Raw. There we go. And there's nothing more to it than to click this little hamburger menu and select all, and then go down here to Save Images. And I'm going to choose Digital Negative as the format, and I'm going to save it in the same location and click Save. And then I'll just click Done. And in a moment, the 2 new DNG files appear right here. So now what do I do with those DNG files?
So our camera calibration software, which we downloaded from the xritephoto.com website when we bought our ColorChecker, we just simply drag them into the dual illuminant tab. If you notice, in the camera calibration software, you have 3 tabs at the top right. One says
DNG.
And the next one says
Dual Illuminate DNG, and then finally ICC TIFF.
Right. So if we're using something like Capture One or some other kind of software that requires an ICC, we have that capability. But today we're talking about dual illuminate DNGs. So let's click on that middle tab, and we're just simply going to drag those 2 images into the software.
Well, I've already done that, and they're loading right now. So as soon as they get in, the software does something pretty amazing when it sees that there's a color checker.
It does. It actually finds it. It aligns to the 24-patch color checker.
And you can see that here on the screen right now.
And it measures each of those 24 patches, because remember, what the software is doing is it knows exactly what value that color checker is. And now it's seeing what it gets from a particular camera sensor. So in the end, the profile is going to try to make that camera sensor produce color as accurately as possible.
So what do I have to do once I've got these 4 green dots on each one and each color checker patch has the green box around it? What do I do?
You're just going to create the profile. Name it whatever you want to name it.
Right. Well, I'm not going to do this one because, as you can see in my screen right here, I've already got it done. So I'm going to cancel this because I've already done this. But you just say save, and it would put it in the camera profiles folder in the appropriate place. If you need more information, you can go to the X-Rite website under support for ColorChecker, and it can tell you the exact paths of where these profiles are kept. And they can be used in other software packages like Luminar 4. So there are lots of different ways you can use this. In my studio, I set up a product table and a gray background and filled the viewfinder with the color checker. And here's the blue light. This is the 10,000 degree Kelvin. And then I changed it over to 2,800 degrees, which is a lot more yellow, and took the pictures. At the same time, I shot it with all 3 of my digital cameras, and the software automatically put the profiles in the correct place for Photoshop and Lightroom. So I was done. It was really, really super easy. It took more time to set the lights up than it did to actually make the profiles. So it's really quite good, Brenda. You got something really amazing here.
Yeah, I love these dual illuminate master profiles. I just think they're the most useful thing in the world. So there are two steps here, though. We've got to attach the profile and then do a white balance. It's really important to remember that the white balance is a separate function in Adobe products. So we'll apply the profile and then do a white balance.
Here I have 4 photographs I've made with different cameras of different people at different times. I'm going to open them up in Camera Raw. And we'll start with this picture of Amy. By default, you'll notice that it says Adobe Color as the profile. So the first thing we're going to do is assign the profile. And I'm just going to click down here to the word Browse. And notice that I've got a folder that says Profiles. Adobe's Camera Raw converter, whether you're using Lightroom or Bridge, knows what the camera is, so it only gives me the profile for this camera, for the 1DX. So I'm going to click on that, and now I'm set to do the work on this particular image. So I'll click Close, and we'll go through this just kind of quickly so you understand how to use the color checker. The first thing I do is I white balance. So I'm going to go to the white balance tool. That's this picker right here. And I'm going to choose the 4th gray patch. So white, light gray, darker gray, darker gray. I'm going to click, and you notice the color changed immediately. So now, if you look over right here, and actually to make it easier for you to see, I'm going to put a color sampler on that. And you can see that they're almost perfectly balanced at 142 red, 142 green, and 143 blue. So that's almost perfectly white balanced. Next, I'm going to check my exposure. Now, this is something that most people don't do, but I'm going to put a color sampler tool right here. And as long as I've got highlight detail between 242 and 249, I'm not going to have any blown out highlights on any type of printer or website or any kind of device. But what I want to do is I want to set my white clipping point. And to do that, I'm going to hold down the Option key on the Mac, the Alt key in Windows, and just drag this slider, this white slider, over until I see the patch appear. There you go. And now I'm just going to back it off until it disappears. Now that is the brightest part of the photograph. So I don't have to worry about anything in my photograph becoming overexposed, because that's the brightest part of whites with detail in it. And I think that works really, really well. So that's my workflow, Brenda.
That's a great technique. You know, this is the great thing about these profiles, is the important thing to understand is that Adobe is going to apply Adobe Color as a generic profile. And so once we've made the custom profile, now we can go use any workflow that we choose to set our white balance, to set our clipping points. Now it becomes really a point of what your preference is for what your workflow is.
Right. And this color is so much more accurate. I want to run back there for just a second because we've got other pictures here. And I just want to show that with different cameras, this is the 1DX again. That's the 1DX. This is the 5DSR. So when I come in here and choose Browse and go to Profiles, there's the one for the 5DSR. So it's a different profile than the one for the 1DX or the 1DX Mark II or whatever camera I'd profiled. So what this means is that this profile is the only one available because Camera Raw knows what camera I shot it with. So that makes this really, really easy. And you can set up a preset to do this automatically for you when you bring them in. Particularly in Lightroom, it's very, very handy. Brenda?
It is. It really is. It's a very nice feature that that the Adobe products don't show you profiles that are not for the camera that you're using.
Yeah, that's really huge. So do you want to go through the workflow?
It's really easy to use this workflow on however many images you have. I tell people all the time, you can do it on 1 or 1,000, just as easy. Because once you set up one image, you simply sync all the rest that are shot in that light on that camera to that setting. Do you have something you can show us, Kev?
Yeah, I do. I'm actually loading it into Camera Raw right now. I have a whole bunch of photographs I made last weekend of a musician friend of mine. And this is the main setup with the color checker chart. And I'm going to blow this up so you can see it. I'm going to start by making sure I apply the profile. So right over here, I'll choose Browse, Profiles, and there's the 1DX Mark II. Then I'm going to click Close. Now, here's a secret. Once I get this done, I can synchronize them to all of the pictures I shot in between the color checkers. And I'll show you what I mean by that in just a moment. So let me get the color sampler, or the white balance tool rather, and I'm going to white balance it again using that middle gray patch. And I'm sure you saw the color change. So this is now neutral. And I'll place a sampler on the white patch so you can see 231, 231, 229. This one's a little underexposed there. Right there, it's about the same. So I'm just going to roll this up until it says 242. There we go. About a half a stop more exposure. Now I'm going to go to the whites, hold down the Option key. Here you see that the sunlight is already burned out completely white. Well, I don't care about that because it has no detail in it that I'm interested in. I'm just going to drag this white slider up until I see those white patches glow, and then I'm going to back them off. Now I've got the perfect clipping set, the perfect white point set for my subject, which is the musician. And in this case, I'm also going to do the blacks. I'll hold down the Option key again and just move the slider over till I see a tiny bit of black appear and then back it off. I can always make something more black later, but if I go too far, it's impossible to get it back in editing. So that's all I have to do to get the image ready. Then I select all. And once they're selected, choose Sync Settings and OK. And now every single image in the batch that I've just picked has been color corrected. I had the right profile applied to it, and I've also set my black and white clipping points. So it's a really powerful way of handling the workflow.
Now, Kevin, I have people tell me all the time, oh, I don't have time to use a color checker. So what you're saying is, if you say you don't have time to use a color checker, you're saying you don't have one split second to take a photograph of a color checker in RAW that will save you hours and hours in post-production.
That's exactly what you're saying. Now, I've been using a color checker chart since, well, obviously we talked about film, but since the beginning of digital. And the reason I've been doing that, Brenda, is because it makes my work so much faster. So I have all those pictures of Peter Norman, the musician, but I want to switch back to Bridge for just a second. And notice this next set of images. I've got all of these right here. So I go to my very last color checker chart, click on it, go down to the last image in the group, hold down the Shift key to click all of them, and then I open those up in Camera Raw, and I'm ready to repeat the process I showed you earlier. So that just saves a huge amount of time. I just get the pictures in between the color checker charts and do the workflow, and it takes no time at all. It took me maybe 2 minutes to color correct every single image, and there were over 700 pictures there. And it makes my initial editing just, I'm not being much of a host here, I'm being a user, and I'm a complete believer.
Yeah, it really shines when you've got two different cameras that you're trying to match as well. So it's great for one camera because you know you're getting absolutely accurate neutral color. But man, when you've got two cameras that you need them to look alike, if you've ever shot a wedding, if you've ever shot a party, if you've ever shot anything with a second shooter, you know exactly what we mean.
Well, Brenda, I've got a question for you, and this is one that I know the answer to. But a lot of people say, well, why can't I just get a picture of a color checker chart and make a print of it and use it that way? And there's a lot more involved in the manufacture of a color checker chart than meets the eye.
Yeah, a lot of people ask me, why does this thing cost so much? It's just printed on paper. And that's not true. This is not a printed item. This is paint on paper that's very, very meticulously created and very, very meticulously measured before it's manufactured. So why don't we take a look at how the color checkers colors are actually manufactured in the Munsell lab.
We're here today to give you an introduction to how the color checker targets are actually made. The first step in making any color checker is going to be taking our recipe and adding in the base pigments to be able to create that color checker color. Then we take it to the mixing station so that when we go to the coating station and the color is poured out, it is then coated at a uniform thickness to ensure that there is consistent color throughout this production run, but also from production run to production run. The colors go through our coater and then they come out on the other end where they are dry, and here the colors are then picked up and they're checked in our quality control process. We utilize all the latest spectrophotometers for doing the readings. They are then placed on the shelves, dried and properly aged to ensure the color is accurate and stable. Once they have dried and aged properly, we then take them, send them to our converter where they are turned into your own personal color checker chart.
Okay, that sounds very simple, but I think there's a whole lot more to it than Art just explained. There's probably some, shall we say, quality control that kind of got left out.
Yeah. As you saw, when they come off of the coater, they're measured by these very sophisticated densitometers. They're then sort of pre-dried, and they're measured again before they go into storage to really cure. And then they're measured a third time when they're pulled out of storage to go to the people that actually assemble them into the color checker product. So at any point, and I've literally been in the Munsell labs, Kevin, when they mix this paint up and they put the paper on there and they coat the paper, it comes off, they start to measure it, and it fails, they throw everything of that batch in the trash and start over. So the measurement of the pigments by weight is the only way that we can really make sure that we get that paint to the
saw in the very first scene, we saw that they were pouring paint into a container on a scale. So that's how they measure it rather than just by volume.
That's exactly right. You can't measure the pigment accurately enough in a liquid form, so it's actually measured on a scale in a dry form.
So I think the takeaway to this is that these color checkers are way more delicate and way more meticulously made than people let on.
Well, that's right, and that's why the Color Checker Passport has been so popular, is because we have something that is a hard shell case that we can open up and use without ever touching the patches. The two big enemies of these colors are light and finger oils. So if we can keep them clean and we can keep them out of the light as much as possible, they're going to give us good service and be accurate for a very long time. Now, they don't last forever. We recommend that we replace them about every 2 years. That's kind of at an average use. If you're using them less often in a flash situation and you're keeping them closed up and not in extreme heat and so forth, they may last a couple of years longer. But keep in mind that if they're ever soiled or damaged in any way, they're done. So it's important to keep these healthy and to replace them at the right time.
Right. And that's something that I think is really important that people understand. I always tell people to hold it by the edges so that you don't get your fingers on the patches, because that's
right.
The worst thing that you can do to them.
Yeah, they don't. The finger oils really degrade the paints very, very quickly.
So a quick story. A long time ago, I was watching Greg Gorman at a Photo Marketing Association show, and he was doing portraits. And he had this color checker chart that had a black strip on it, a white strip, and a gray strip. And I said, ooh, I want one of those. So I went back to my local camera store. I was getting ready to write my first book, and I thought that would be a great illustration. And I said, well, they've got this color checker that has a black, a gray, and a white. They looked it up in the catalog, and there was no such thing. Well, I got a hold of Munsell, and what an amazing company. They actually made this one for me. If you could run your fingers over it, and you can't, you can feel these individual patches where they've glued down the strips and even the name where it says Graytag Macbeth Color Checker Grayscale Balance Chart. So this is one of my treasures. It's no longer in service because, as you can see from the corner, I've used the heck out of it. And I'm just really super impressed with what Munsell and X-Rite, who wound up buying Graytag Macbeth, has done.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, the Munsell lab and the formulations and the way we do things are still done. The Munsell lab is now inside the X-Rite building in Grand Rapids. But, the other important thing to know, Kev, is that because customers ask us for things, we develop new products. So that three-step gray is now a real product and has been for many years. In the last few years, we've introduced new sizes of ColorChecker 24 patches because customers need them, photographers need them for special applications. So X-Rite's here for you, Munsell Labs is here for you, and color checkers are still the standard in the industry for color.
Brenda Hipsher, thank you so very, very much for being with us today. You've made this absolutely brilliant. I've thoroughly enjoyed chatting with you. And I know that there's more to the story of making color checkers. I hope we can have you back to talk about that. For now, for Photofocus and X-Rite Photo and Video, I'm Kevin Ames, Director of Content. Have a brilliant, colorful day and week and year and career.